Many of us suffer in silence, afraid to reach out, speak up, or ask for help. None of us are immune to anxiety or depression, whether mild, moderate, or severe. There are, however, some of us who are in desperate need of a lifeline.
In the Caribbean, when it comes to mental illness, I would like to approach that by looking at four factors really. That there's a lot of hesitancy that comes within our culture. It also comes from an economic base, a social base, and the taboo political base. There is generally a lot of stigma associated with mental illness around the world. But in the Caribbean, if we look particularly at our cultural background when it comes to our history and our spirituality, we know that mental illness for us is a little bit of a taboo, spiritual taboo. We tend to associate it with such things as obia, possession, voodoo. And when we look at that factor within our culture, you can understand why there's a lot of hesitancy with identifying or claiming or seeking help, because then you become looked upon or frowned upon in terms of a stigma associated with being possessed or opiate or someone working something on you. And that tends to be consistent throughout the Caribbean region. Then we also look at what our history has shown when it comes to how we ostracize. There's a culture of ostracism with anything that is not normal, discriminated against. We look at our history with lepers and what we had done. And it is a similar thing when it comes to mental illness. Again, when you associate it with our spiritual nature and the spiritual taboos, then we have the ostracism that comes within our culture. And that also is a factor that we have to put in place.
I remember going to an American Psychological Association conference about 4 years ago, and this was their biggest issue also. So I say that to say that this is a problem worldwide, at different levels for different societies, for maybe different reasons and so on. And so their whole strategy I remember that particular presentation by the CEO was about how they were going to address stigma of mental illness. So we are really no different, and we have much less, resources and all of that to kind of push around this stigma. I think it's a general human issue because it means there's an acceptance and when the mind and the mind is an issue for people, they see it as their center. So it's almost like we can't admit, we can't see that maybe there's something different or something unhealthy about the way that I am processing and using my mind. And I have to say that it was never always the case historically. Historically, when we look at ancient traditions and ancient tribes and villages, there was a place for people that were mentally ill. There was an understanding that these individuals were X, Y, and Z. This was their function and this was their role. And they were managed effectively within the community. However, we went through a period of time where there was a shift in how mental illness was viewed. And I think it had to do with how the world was being globalized, and colonized. And therefore came, the chains, and historically for us in the Caribbean, that's what we understand about mental illness from our time, from those generations of, let's say, slavery coming forward, that you chain them up and you lock them away outside of the community, outside of the village. And this is what has perpetuated that kind of understanding of mental illness. We are just coming out of some of those things, literally, meaning, 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, is what we're talking about. We're talking about the cowbells and these kinds of things that people used to have to, how they were viewed. So we are actually still on the heels, if you will, of that kind of ideology around mental illness, so it's not surprising where we're at, and some of those things are shifting, but we have so much more to go.
I felt really lonely. Even though there were people around me, it seemed as though there was nobody there. I felt as though I was in this dark place where nobody could see me. So even though I have friends around or family who would be talking and laughing and joking with me, I would joke. But in the joking, I still felt as though I was distant. I'm not being seen. Nobody knows. Nobody understands. It really was like a dark room where even if you stretch out your hand, you can't see in front of you. That's how bad it was for me.
To be honest, I've never really thought about ending my life, but I've come to very, very, very low points in my life when I've thought of what is the point of life. I personally think that I'm too chicken to commit suicide. It takes a lot of commitment to go all the way with something like that. So I won't say that I'll ever consider taking my life, but I have been extremely low in my life.
Generally a lot of economic factors where health on a whole is given less than the economic share, a big of the pizza pie. And when it comes to mental health in particular, you're even given less of an economic investment. So the economic resources is not there. When I say economic resources, it's in terms of education or resources, or in testing, or in treatment, or in identification. So it's one thing to say that there's a mental illness is a factor, but one, how did we define it, and how do we treat it, and how do we allow for care so that there's a normal integration or reintegration in society? Then we look at the social factor as well within the Caribbean, and that's another reason for the discrimination, because when you look the Caribbean, we are marketed as a happy-go-lucky environment. We drink, we marry, we have fun, we laid back. There's no stress. And mental illness, when we look at the definition that we applied earlier, we see that it is associated with the distress, which goes against the social atmosphere of the Caribbean. And again, no one wants to claim it or attach it to them, because then it means you are different from others and not in the easy, happy-go-lucky, social, happy partying sort of atmosphere associated with the Caribbean. And then we look at the political aspect as to why in the Caribbean there's a lot of discrimination, and that's because it is not a part of our important policy. In terms of the political mechanism, mental illness is not viewed with the same importance and reverence that is given in national policy, public policy. So there are outdated guidelines, there are outdated policies that govern how mental health is viewed, that govern how mental illness is treated, that also looks at, it just hasn't changed the rhetoric from the 60s and 70s. It is still the same archaic way of looking at mental health and mental illness.
I was in a domestic violence marriage for 5 years. So with a narcissist. So the first thing he did was strip me of my self-esteem. And that made me feel like a nobody. So regardless of what anyone did for me, I was never grateful for anything, or I never felt appreciated, because within myself, I had no self-love anymore. I had no self-esteem, and I felt completely worthless. So many of the attempts would have been based on things that he would have said. Go kill yourself. The place would be better without you. He don't care. Things like that. And, it was just this one particular night where that was it. I was no longer a cry for help. It was, this is it.
I think that a few things which have been happening and maybe slow, and we have to recognize that this kind of shift, this kind of paradigm shift takes some time, a lot of time, and so it's not going to happen next year. It's not going to happen the year after that. We're talking about lots of years, not tons, right? But one of the things that's important is also the going back to the idea of the community and the family and those systems kind of understanding mental health in general. I think that's one very important thing. Number two, that which has this idea that mental illness only is in the asylums, in the institutions, at the psychiatric wards, and that's the only place that mental illness resides. That's not the case. So that's the other piece that's important, is understanding how mental health is applicable to all of us, right, at various times. Some things are episodic, some things are transient, but some things are more chronic, and so we have to kind of begin to think that, wait, everybody's dealing with this on some level at some point, right? Even if whether it's yourself, whether it's your family member, whether it's you last year and you this, or whatever it might be, that we're all dealing with it at some level, some more difficult than others. And so I think that message, I think the pandemic has sent that message really strongly to us, and I think that has caused some of this eye-opening that, wait, hold on, I too can struggle with anxiety, right? And that's a mental illness, right? So we only want to call sometimes mental illness things like schizophrenia and bipolar, things that look really, really extreme at times. But mental illness is the depression, it's the anxiety, it's the personality disorder, it's so many things that it's the trauma, right? So all of it is something that we need to recognize. And those two things, so in line with those things, of course, public education campaigns are always important. Letting people know, letting people see the messages of these brave individuals that we have that come forward sometimes and share their stories, how important those stories are. That, yes, I'm a normal person working at a normal store, and I struggle, with this. And I may or may not be on medication. I may or may not be going to therapy, things like that become more normalized are definitely very helpful. Celebrities, showing their voices. Again, these are people that we revere, whether it's on social media influencers, people like that are kind of telling stories that, I struggle, as much as you see me as a celebrity, I'm a normal person too, and a normal person that also has their struggles. So those things I think are important in the movement forward. And of course, this awareness as well at a young level, early childhood levels, childhood, those things are really important in terms of understanding from an early stage what this is really about, that what we call the mental health literacy.
Yes, I have thought about ending my life on a few occasions. While I am a mental health professional now, I was once a person who did not have an understanding of how mental illness is and how it affects our well-being. However, at the time, I was going through an emotional state and I just felt overwhelmed.
You are resourceful, right? And there are resources out there. As much as it is challenging, there are resources out there that we can try to access. And even if you're not able to get into somewhere like a clinic and talk to somebody or something along those lines, there are ways that you can self-help, right? And ways that you can figure out or ask some supportive somebody, reach out to somebody. That's an issue that a lot of us have. Difficulty reaching out to somebody else, letting them know, this is how I'm feeling. We're surprised every time when we run groups, when we do things like you mentioned doing, that so many people are feeling what we're feeling, right? And it brings us together. It helps us to understand that, listen, I'm not alone. And therefore, there are things that we can do together, even if it is a little group, a little support group that's online, and helping to kind of figure out what are some resources, that I can learn to help myself, even at a little bit, there's definitely things that you're gonna need professional help for, but at the very least, let's learn to kind of reach out and also be that person for others to reach out to, so that we're supporting each other a lot more. There's a lot more room for compassion and kindness among us as human beings that we need to activate. That would be very helpful in this whole process. Because social support, we've seen it in physical illnesses, in mental illnesses, how much better it makes an individual's life, increases even mortality rates in these chronic illnesses, etc. Social support alone, it's critical.
Mental wellness matters. You matter.
Mental wellness matters. You matter. Let me be your lifeline.
HELPME Lifeline Needed, made possible by INET Antigua, Delamo Investments Group, and the American University of Antigua.
AU is proud to be one of the few international medical schools to obtain both New York State Education Department and Medical Board of California approval, and to have received accreditation by CAM, the new accrediting agency for the Caribbean region. We believe this gives our graduates greater opportunities to obtain residencies in the fields of their choice.
That's the key, is just go full steam ahead right from the start. So that way any door that you want open can be opened.